it's actually an amazing panel that we've had assembled today, and I'm very honored, privileged, #humbled, #blessed, to be able to talk to the folks that are on stage today. They are an incredible group that has a lot of insights around meeting these 2030 climate goals, and I am very happy to introduce them now. So to my immediate left is Assistant Secretary Monica Medina. Her mandate includes the Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs at the State Department. That's a mouthful, but a good mouthful. And to her left is Jordi Vaquer. He is the Secretary General of Metropolis, which is an organization that works with cities around the world to share best practices and information around meeting their goals. To his left is the President and Chair of the Export-Import Bank of the United States, Reta Jo Lewis. Thank you so much for being here. And lastly, but certainly not leastly, is Partho Sanyal. He's a partner at NextEra Energy, and he's going to be talking to us about the innovations that they're backing that are going to help solve some of these climate challenges that we face. So a wonderful panel, and thank you all so much for participating. Assistant Secretary, I'd like to start with you, and I would love to get a sense from you of what our climate goals actually are and how the State Department sees cities playing a role in meeting those climate goals.
Thank you, John. It's so nice to be here. It's great to see everybody. It's great to be talking about these issues and connecting what we're doing on the global stage to what happens in cities. I'm really honored to be on this panel with these other panelists who are also problem solvers, just like all of you out in the cities where the rubber really does meet the road on environmental issues. As John mentioned, I lead the department, or the bureau in the State Department, called Oceans, Environment, and Science, and we are basically America's ambassadors for the planet. I have traveled to cities all over the world, from Stockholm to Suva, from Kinshasa to Houston, and what is obvious is that cities are on the front line of our climate challenges, and other challenges too, all of them global, and all of them needing our attention now. Look at around us at this country. The Western U.S. is experiencing a 1,200-year drought with millions of Americans facing perpetual water shortages, and I know that's been a kind of a constant source of conversation during this meeting. Devastating floods threaten roads and bridges and even entire buildings, as we know painfully from this region, and taxing infrastructure is threatening people's lives and their health. And you also face mountains of waste in cities with nowhere to put it. We can no longer export plastic and other solid waste to China and other countries, and yet we're hooked on plastic, we're drowning in it. And finally, cities are growing fast, and the stress on our water and our nature and biodiversity is literally swallowing up wetlands. We're losing trees, and we're devouring our water supplies. We're at a turning point, and we have to do something, and the way we address the challenges over the next 10 years is really pivotal, and we've got to meet this moment. And I'm here to tell you that the Biden administration puts these challenges at the top of our agenda, both domestically and in foreign policy, but we can't do this work without you. So I'm here to just talk about 3 quick ways that we're working to help mayors and municipal governments all around the country. The first is through the domestic laws that I think you've heard so much about, that are ambitious but are going to keep us to our overall goal, which is what we're here to talk about, which is keeping climate change, global warming, to within 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2050. And we in the US have also promised to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 50 to 52% by 2030. That's a lot of work to do, and you all see it every day. You're where it's hitting hardest, and the bills and the laws that our Congress has passed and that we in the Biden administration are implementing are going to provide you lots of new tools and lots of funds to actually meet those challenges. So the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure bill are hopefully going to be a shot in the arm for all of you cities out there that are dealing with these climate crises, from water to drought to needing to be more energy efficient. And we're going to focus on frontline communities, the ones that have been hit the hardest by aging infrastructure, toxic loads, and greenhouse gas emission impacts. This is so important for us globally, because if we can show the world, if we can tell developing countries that are also being hit hard by climate change, that we, the second largest emitter in the world, are making the greatest strides on the planet to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, then we can help bring other countries along. The second thing we're doing is helping to tackle the plastic crisis, and plastic is a part of the climate crisis. Plastic accounts for about 3.5% of our greenhouse gas emissions, and that's a big number when you break down how many things make up our greenhouse gas emission budget. And we've just begun negotiating a global agreement on plastic pollution, and the world is, as I said, the world is drowning in plastic, not just us, and I think all of you know this, and we're going to do something about it by working with cities to come up with a flexible agreement that aims high but doesn't have any one-size-fits-all solutions, a little bit like the Paris Agreement. But we have no federal law on plastic pollution, so we're going to rely on mayors and municipal governments to actually implement this law, and we need to partner with you. The third thing we're doing is tackling the biodiversity crisis by helping to prepare for climate change by using nature-based solutions, things like wetlands and beaches and things to keep our climate from, literally the sea, from swallowing us up. And finally, at the State Department, we're really concerned about and want to help convene mayors from around the world, cities like yours, to share ideas and build on local successes. So next year, I'm pleased to say that the State Department will host in Denver the City Summit of the Americas. It's April 24th to 28th next year, and that summit will bring together leaders from all over the world to talk about these very challenges. And at that event, we'll be launching something called the Cities Forward Initiative, where we're going to match U.S. cities with their foreign counterparts throughout Latin America and the Caribbean for peer-to-peer sharing and learning. And we'll then support that effort with meetings to bring in experts from industry and other stakeholders, academia, the best of the brightest, to help solve these problems and do it in a way that helps export and bring American diplomacy to bear in other parts of the world. You are our best diplomats, our best representatives. And so if you're interested in being a part of these partnerships, please approach me or one of the folks in the front row here from the State Department. We'd love to sign you up and have you help us work with cities around the world. Just want to close by saying thank you so much for what you do. We couldn't do our work at the global level without the work you do in the cities, on the streets, making them safer for climate, from plastic pollution, and saving biodiversity. So thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's nice to have you. And that's a very big table that you just set. So we have a lot of things to talk about. I'm going to try and move things along quickly. Jordi, when you think about these challenges that the Assistant Secretary has laid out, how do you see cities around the world looking at solutions now? What sorts of things are people looking for from business potentially in the United States or anywhere else to address these very significant problems that we face?
So hi, and it's a pleasure to be here. Let's start with the good. So I work with Metropolis, which is an organization with cities from above 1 million, from all over the world, especially from Asia, but from many parts of the world. And there's two areas where cities are very focused. One is mobility. Very seriously rethinking mobility in many ways, active mobility, public transportation, electric mobility, and all the rest. Now, there is a lot that's being done with industries, by industry, with the cities. By no means, a one battle, but the cities are focused. And the other area where they are focused is energy. Both energy production and energy consumption, where the energy comes from and how much of it is used, refitting buildings, for example, the whole issue of air conditioning and many others. On those two, I would say, I see a lot of movement. I see energy, I see ideas, economic opportunity are all over. You were mentioning plastic. Circular economy and waste, that's a less homogeneous interest. You find cities that are really very active and working very seriously on this. on consumption, on food production, and connecting it to the urban tissue, the old divisions between urban and rural, they're no longer holding, just like the old divisions between city and nature are no longer holding. That's good. But that's not uniform. Not every city is thinking about this. Now, what am I worried about? What are we not thinking enough about? Nature, the journal, had a study, I think it was a couple of months ago, talking about something which is really very, very serious. And they were calculating if developing world cities would bring their infrastructure to the standard of developed nations, with the current construction techniques and the way we do things now, we would be adding, until 2050, 109 gigatons of CO2. If, on top of that, we take into account that by 2050, we expect 2 billion more people to move to cities, that extra infrastructure, both in developing and in industrialized economies, would bring in 117 gigatons of CO2 into the picture. Now, that dwarfs anything that we could do on mobility or on, fitting buildings or anything else. So here's my message. We need to very seriously rethink infrastructure, what we're going to build in the next 20 years, because it has lock-in effects that will be with us for decades. Right. Concrete, the very material, is really a problem. And we're not thinking anywhere nearly enough about this. And in the spirit of partnership that was just mentioned, that is something that industries, cities in the industrialized and in the developing countries need to think about together. You start having, for example, public buildings built out of wood, right? Which is much more sustainable. But can this be scaled up to the size we need?
Well, funnily enough, the Biden administration just announced something, I think, yesterday, where they're going to pour some money into just that. So part of the biomanufacturing push that's happening in the States right now includes money for just these kinds of initiatives and innovations.
But there is a disconnect here. So when Istanbul or Mumbai or Bogota think about their future, that thinking, that planning is not connected to when the industry is thinking about these new materials. Unlike with mobility, where the connection is there, unlike with energy, where the connection is there, I really think there's the huge threat, but also opportunity is in this area, in building the cities of the future.
Well, I mean, that gets to an interesting point that, Partho, I think you're very well equipped to address, which is the economic opportunity for cities in the United States to really drive some of these innovations, support and foster local business that can add revenue to your tax base, that can improve things for your economy, and also then take those things abroad with the help of organizations like the State Department and like the Export-Import Bank, which we'll hear about in just one second. But Partho, I would love for you to talk about kind of the innovations that y'all are seeing that are addressing some of these issues that Jordi is talking about.
Thank you, John. So if we break down the problem that we're facing, I think it is clear that the carbonization of the world is creating challenges, right? And so in order to address this, the first question is, whose responsibility is it? Is it the responsibility of cities or of governments, of individuals? And the answer is there's no borders for how carbon can travel, right? So if cities are the centers of excellence, thought leaders, that's a start, because smart people move to cities, they have universities, they have ecosystems where they want to live and thrive. And so a lot of the thought leaders live in these cities. But the problem is ubiquitous. The problem is endemic. It's systemic, whatever the issue, whatever the right sort of description is. And so what do you need to throw at it? Well, you need to put science to work, right? Because the science of how to solve these problems, some of it exists, some of it does not yet exist. And so how do you get science to focus on solutions? So you can appeal to people. And that's one way, so you've got to educate them. But you have to provide them with incentives. And if you provide them with the right incentives, then these things can be scaled. So if you think of the United States as a center where these problems are being discussed. We have great universities. We have the sort of human talent to address this. The government of the United States, across various political ideologies, has tried to provide funding to address this, and that's a start, right? Because you need, for some technologies that are not commercially viable, you need a catalyst. You need the government, perhaps, to be able to fund the first pilot plant or the first semi-commercial plant, right? And by increasing the scale, you can drive down costs, right? And then I think the most important part is that the innovation that is available through private capital and eventually influencing individual people needs to become such that the cost of providing these services need to be reasonable and affordable, right? Everybody recognizes that this is a problem, but nobody individually wants to lower their thermostat or increase their thermostat to 85 degrees when you live in Phoenix, Arizona. They like it at 72 or 65. And if somebody says to you, well, the cost of 65 is triple the cost of 72, and it's 10 times the cost of 85, nobody's going to adopt this. So you've got to provide signals that allow consumers to say, well, I can afford 65. In order to afford 65, the following things have to happen. So in my mind, the responsibility that we all share, but all of us are working at in different ways, is to bring this to the masses. You've got to reduce costs, and to reduce costs, you've got to provide regulation that is consistent. You can't have regulation that says something year one, and 2 years later the regulation expires because the political backstop of that changes. A new party comes to power. Private industry is making decisions worth 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And to deploy capital for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, you need rules that need to remain consistent for the most part. And by the way, you cannot foresee all these rules. You can't write all of these things in a contract because you can't write a contract for 40 years. So the contract needs to have the flexibility to adapt to what is happening on the ground. And you need people to be able to adapt to the changing environment. Because if a new technology arrives that is better than the old technology, the old technology should be sunsetted, should be put to bed. And the new technology, I mean, the electric engine was not invented because the mechanical engine stopped working.
Right.
It was invented despite, right? And so we are seeing through technology, the digitization of the world, that the climate solution has more levers to pull.
Right. I think one of the levers is actually not just an innovation lever or a science lever, it's also a financial lever, right? And one of the ways in which this financial lever can get pulled is through organizations like the Export-Import Bank to bring these technologies that are being developed, and I'll touch on this a little bit as well, bring these technologies to markets that need them. And to ensure that these things can have the impact that they need to. But what is the Export-Import Bank? How does it work? What is it doing? Chair, can you please explain to the folks in the audience what it is?
You know, John, that is a question that I find myself doing in the last 7 months on a regular basis. And first of all, just thank you very much for being here. And it's so great to be here with Metropolis and a business leader, and definitely my government colleague, my Biden administration colleague, to talk about these kinds of issues. And basically, people want to know, what is the Export-Import Bank? Well, I'm actually very delighted to be here with Team XM. They're sitting right here on that fourth row. XM Bank is, I call it, one of America's best kept secrets, that we are really trying to make sure that we are engaging in organizations and conferences and meetings like this, so we can say to those who need to use the services of America's only export credit agency that we are here, we're open, we're back, and we're ready to engage with you. You know, this government agency that I lead supports, local job creation, and it's really by providing financing for U.S.-based exports, both goods and services.
Right.
So people sometimes think services is not included, but that is a very big place for us. And so at Export-Import Bank, we offer loan guarantees, direct loans, working capital for small businesses, and export credit insurance products, because we want to make sure that our American exporters get paid on those invoices that they're out there creating. You know, Export-Import Bank was established about 88 years ago, and the role that it was established about still lives on for today, playing a very critical role in fostering economic opportunities for U.S. companies and our workers. And I emphasize our workers. The goal of XM really is that we are there to fill the gaps left by private sector financing so that American companies can really win more sales and ultimately be more competitive in a very crowded global marketplace. I think what most people don't understand is that you know, and we tell businesses this all the time, it doesn't matter, especially our small and medium-sized enterprises, that over 90% of the consumer marketplace resides outside of the United States. In terms of, that's where the competition is, that's where the new customers are. And we want to be the entity that gives them the leg up that they need if they want to be out there competing and winning. One of the things that we're very serious about is that as it relates specifically on the Smart Cities agenda, is that we are supporting America's clean tech exports and energy efficiency exports. You know, if you look at what President Biden has done, including what we're doing at XM Bank as one of the agencies, we're really dedicated to tackling this climate crisis. And so we're really trying to advance a lot of clean tech clean energy projects, and we're doing so in a number of ways. One of the things that has become clear is that when XM was closed and now it was reauthorized in 2019, Congress gave us a mandate to make sure that we made more financing available for small business, for renewables and energy efficiency and energy storage types of financing transactions, for more financing available for work in sub-Saharan Africa, and definitely more financing as it relates to China and its transformational export initiatives. When you really look at all that we can do as an agency, we stand ready to work alongside cities, economic teams, their international teams, because we know that mayors and governors and county executives and local elected officials, you are all the economic drivers in your communities. You're dealing with your businesses each and every day. And we want to make sure, especially not just XM, but for the entire whole of government, that we are working alongside of local governments to ensure that they understand what our government agencies can do for them, what our government agencies, we may compete, but we know that we don't have to be competitors. And that's why we work very closely with our Department of Commerce colleagues, we work very closely with our Department of State colleagues, and definitely work very close with our Small Business Administration to support local businesses. And so being here on this stage talking about these kinds of issues is really a priority for XM Bank, and going to what he was saying about new technologies. We have opportunities and ways that we can continue to work around with businesses, especially when these types of new technologies have an impact on not just our economic security, but also on our national security.
Yeah, I mean, and for those of you in the audience, just to underscore the kinds of money we're talking about here, what 2021 was $5.8 billion that y'all issued in loans to companies. Those could be companies in your communities if y'all would access that money. And that is not an insignificant chunk of change.
And not only that, creating in 2021 over 39,000 jobs in America.
Right.
And that is what's so important for us. And that's one of the reasons why we launched a new initiative this past April about Make More in America, because we understand that it is about how can we support more domestic manufacturing here in the United States. How can we support more jobs here in the United States? Because one of the things that we know, we have got to export more from America as we make more in America.
I mean, this really gets to, I think, some fundamental points, which is that as this energy transition occurs, you're looking at the McKinsey study, I think, talks about $9 trillion a year for the next, 30 years or something to really address the climate crisis effectively. So that's a massive amount of money that needs to get spent, and that's a massive economic opportunity for the cities and states that are willing to embrace this and support the kinds of growth that we're talking about here. And I mean, Partho and I are venture capitalists, so like we're investing in some of these early stage technologies, but we need to see pilots from cities. We need to see initiatives from cities that can create the opportunity for these technologies to really get off the ground, get developed, be commercialized, and be sold so that we can address this stuff. And you talk about the American, making things in America, and one of the key points there, I think, is that we've really gotten roasted when it comes to competing in the climate tech arena. China is the dominant force for battery manufacturing. It's the dominant force for solar panel manufacturing. And there's a lot that needs to be done to sort of leapfrog where China is in relation to the US. We need to accelerate our manufacturing pretty extensively. Jordi, to that point, like, who do you see as the biggest supplier of clean energy technologies globally right now?
Well, you mentioned it, and it is East Asia, and it is in particular China at the moment. But it's so you identified one of the three issues with America projecting abroad its ability to deal with the climate issue at the city level. One of them is America is good with technology, but it's not as good transforming this technology into exporting, manufacturing, and really achieving the kind of scale that's needed. Because the energy transition in Europe, it has to happen because of dependency from Russia. And in the rest of the world, it has to happen as some cities start really from a very low energy consumption. If they had to reach anywhere near what we have in North America or Europe, it would be a total climate disaster. So it's urgent, it's immediate. And America and Europe, by the way, are not ready for this. But the other two challenges, one is very specific, and you were mentioning it. It's governance. The governance of American metropolises, in particular in what pertains getting things done in terms of infrastructure, is not stellar. The image has hugely deteriorated, right? When we see cities that take 15 years, 20 years to build a bridge, to start a light railway system and all this, and it's not because technology isn't there, it's because of governance issues. That's very serious, and I think that's a very important part of these partnerships and dialogues. The third issue is the model. The American suburban model and the sprawl is now very seriously questioned. But as American cities start finding solutions to this, they can do it in ways that connect them to cities that will have similar problems in the Persian Gulf, in Latin America, in other places. I see this as both a problem as an opportunity. If American cities do it on their own and in isolation, I think they will be missing a huge opportunity to double their impact and also economic opportunity to do things with others rather than just do it on their own. So these three things, the manufacturing base, the governance, the urban and metropolitan governance, and this, excuse me, this other issue of getting basically the ability to deliver on or to rethink the urban model, I think those are the three areas where something new needs to happen for America to play this role that now is being played. It cannot be played by Europe. You cannot go with the models of 300,000 old, 200-year-old centers and everyone goes by bicycle. That's not a good model for Kinshasa. That's not the model that's going to change Buenos Aires, right? So Europe cannot do this, but America could. But these three things need to change.
Assistant Secretary, did you want to?
I'll jump in.
Yeah,
Yes,
go
I'll
ahead.
jump in.
Do it.
To say that what I see when I visit other cities in the world is a tremendous opportunity for businesses and for small businesses, for small scale businesses. the solutions that a lot of these countries need and can afford are not giant power plants that churn up coal. It's small-scale solar and small-scale ag projects that bring new technology to places where they have nothing, where they really literally have almost no governance at all. They don't have even the kind of basic services that we take for granted. But the opportunity is huge there, huge. I've just come back from a big water conference in Stockholm where we talked about nothing but how to provide water to places that don't have any access to it. And there are places like that in this country, sadly, on Indian reservations or in Jackson, Mississippi.
Jackson, Mississippi.
But there are also places like that all over the world, and the solutions are being invented here. We just need to get them to the people who need them the most.
How much of this is going to depend on new innovation? Partho, how much of this is based on new innovation, and how much of it is on getting the current technologies that we have into the right hands, making sure that it's distributed adequately and equitably?
Yeah, but both are important. So for adoption, you need more people to use it, right? And for more people to use it, the cost of providing that good or service needs to get to levels where they're competitive with incumbent technologies, right? And so that can only happen if there's mass deployment and such. So that's required. But then new technologies can disintermediate existing technologies in ways that become better, more efficient, more cost-effective, right? And both of those levers need to continue to be pulled. So let's take something very simple like solar technology. As we all know, solar technology 10, 15 years ago cost, today the costs are about a tenth of where it was about 10 to 12 years ago, right? So the technological evolution of solar technology has enabled us to get to a point where it's cost competitive with every other source of energy, right? And on a levelized cost of energy basis, it's actually going to be cheaper, yeah? But the problem is that solar is not a baseload power source, right? It doesn't, there's no sun's rays at 2 in the morning to convert photons to electrons. So you need storage. Storage technology has always been expensive, right? So the new initiatives and the government incentives tied to grid storage and battery storage are game changers, right? So now you could have a 4-hour battery or an 8-hour battery, and the cost of providing storage, coupled with solar, could enable 24/7 clean energy. And that kind of innovation will require digital systems to talk to each other, right? So if you have one set of rules for how a digital system talks to the existing IoT, and it's different across states, across countries, you need uniformity around that, right? So for private industry to go invest capital to provide these solutions, they need some standardization. There is disagreement about measurement of carbon dioxide, what constitutes pollution or not. Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3. The SEC has guidelines how it's going to mandate companies to disclose it. And people are fighting about the wording about what it really means. And so these are complicated matters because we have never dealt with these kinds of problems before. But I think there's hope that there are enough people who are leaning in that the solutions that will become economic are available. We're talking about money, right? The president of the Exim Bank suggested that there is money available. There's a lot of capital available. So capital is not a constraint in itself. The constraints are multifold. The constraints require coordination and technological evolution that allows for solutions to be viable for people. Technology is not an end in itself. It's a means to an end, right? So a lot of people talk about technology as the solution to all our problems. Yes and no. I mean, you can have an artificial intelligence-powered system that tries to spot something, but sometimes they do a poor job, and you need a human to go back and do it. So you're replicating it, right? So the cost of it matters. The clarity of it matters.
So one of the things, John, I'd just like to jump in on that. Yes, there is money available, and one of the things that we like to say is that it really is all about public-private partnerships. It's not necessarily, government cannot walk this walk alone, but why people come to us is because we're the ones that's taking that big risk, especially when you're trying to compete, when our companies are trying to go in and compete against the biggest, one of the biggest export credit agency as it relates to China. And so we were very excited in 2021 to be able to award our deal of the year to First Solar, an Ohio-based company. The reason that went to them, we were able to give them a loan guarantee that allowed them to go in and offer the best, not only knowing full well that our American companies offer the best products, the best services, we abide by the rule of law. And when you go into countries, especially these emerging markets like Guatemala, this is where this project was going, but it was going to create jobs in the United States. They want to go in understanding that the United States government is there to also be a protector for them. And that is why when you talk about, you were discussing about competing against China, it is when Congress mandated that we form a China and transformational export program, it gave us the types of flexibilities that we can use when we're working with businesses on their transactions so that they can be in there competing and so that our companies can win and create those jobs here in America.
That was over $100 million, that loan, right? It was a pretty significant one, right?
It was for First Solar, it was $8.7 million.
8.7 million.
8.7.
I was wrong. I thought it was much more than that. But,
But that's that small business. That's that medium-sized business that
Right.
we want to be supporting so that they don't have to walk the walk alone. They can walk in with the full faith and credit, knowing that America is right there with them.
I'll just jump in and do a slight bit of promotion for the State Department because we too have funds to invest in companies in your cities to bring those kinds of climate technologies to market, and we can help pair them with places that we know need them. So it's called the Global Climate Partnership Program. Please check it out on the State Department website. We also have another one on innovation, science, and technology. It's called the GIST program that my organization runs. We are ready to go. We want to move from just talking about helping the world to actually doing it.
I mean, I think the themes that are emerging from this discussion are sort of multivariate, but if I were to boil them down to a couple of key points, it's the need for public-private partnerships to really accelerate the agenda so that we can meet these 2030 climate goals. It's that we need to have these discussions not just within the United States, but among all of the cities around the world, and they need to happen at the sub-national level. It needs to be happening within and among different cities around the world to share best practices, to share opportunities for trade so that you can have these sort of economic win-win-wins that aren't resulting in sort of extractive the extraction of resources from one country to another, but rather the development of these resources in a positive way and sustainable way, so that we can meet the demands that the world is going to throw at us in the next 20 to 30 years. And with that, we are out of time. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, panelists, for the amazing discussion, and really appreciate it. Thank you.